What's good, y'all? It is Wednesday, January 14th. My name is Patrick, and you're tuned into The Morning Show. On Monday night, after my first day at my new job, I went to draft for an event called the People's Panel, a bill review of some of the 2026 legislation going through the Indiana General Assembly. This event was put on by the Whispering Shelf, originally meant to be held at the bookstore, but because of the number of people that signed up, they had to move it over to draft. I would say there was about 60, 70 people in there to sit and listen to a panel of folks talk about 5 specific pieces of legislation that they're keeping their eyes on and that they wanted to inform us, the general public, about. Those panelists were my favorite state senator, Andrea Hunley, Taylor Hughes, the chief strategic officer for the Indy Chamber, Samantha Bresnahan, senior policy specialist at the ACLU Indiana, Tyler Fenwick from Mirror Indy, the housing reporter, and friend of Conversation Piece and of me, Ronak Shaw, middle school educator and overall awesome human being. So today I'm going to talk about each piece of legislation really quickly, just quickly summarize each piece of legislation that each of the panelists was there to talk about. And then I just want to give my reaction to being in that room. So to start off, Senator Hunley was there to talk about Senate Bill 152, which has to deal with utility companies and the ability to limit the costs that they pass through to us, the customer. So this bill addresses affordability in a major way, and it does 4 main things. So this bill would block utility companies like AES, so privately owned utility companies. AES, for folks that don't know, supplies the electricity and everything that we need to run power in the city of Indianapolis. So the 4 things that this bill would do would be it would stop these utility companies from being able to pass on certain types of costs to the customer. The 4 specific types of costs are lobbying costs, investor relations costs, legal fees, and reconnection fees. The second thing it would do, it would allow utility companies to establish their own assistance programs for ratepayers. So currently, water utilities like Citizens Water can create their own payment plans if they want. They don't have to. They don't have to if they don't want to, but they can, and they have. For some reason, the electric companies are not allowed to do the same thing. And I believe it has to do with the distinction between essentially Citizens Water is like a public owned service, whereas the electric AES is privately owned. So because of that, I believe the electric company, utility company, can't create a payment plan that would allow ratepayers to figure out how to best manage their payments without the fear of having their services shut off. So that's number 2. The third thing that this bill does is it creates a first right of refusal for municipalities or for a public trust to purchase a utility first. So essentially what this means is that utility companies can't just swoop in and purchase plots of land or areas that come available because of whatever reason, a number of different reasons. And will allow the municipalities specifically to be able to claim that or say, we don't want that. The last thing is it creates an itemized bill for your utilities. So right now we just get like a general thing with a price or a cost that we have to pay. And then this bill would require utility companies to itemize what those costs are. So that was Senator Hundley, SB 152. Taylor Hughes was there to talk about House Bill 1423, which is the ILEA, the Indianapolis Local Education Alliance's recommendations for the future of IPS. I just talked about this yesterday as one of the pieces of legislation that I'm already making myself aware of. We've been following it here on the show, so we're going to keep following it. I won't spend too much time there. I will say one thing I learned that I didn't know was this idea of home rule, which essentially means that a local government has first say over the jurisdiction of what happens within their area. So Indianapolis, I guess, maybe Marion County, but Indianapolis specifically, IPS is set up as like a school city, which allows them to levy property tax. And so by home rule, by the definition of home rule, the school city, like the IPS, would be able to not only IPS levies the tax and then they receive the money, or they receive the revenue that is generated from those taxes, which then helps them to take care of buildings, provide transportation, do a lot of different stuff. The ILEA and the governance recommendation, which essentially would create a separate entity, a separate governing entity that oversees the democratically elected IPS board. Except that this new entity, which is the Indianapolis Public Education Corporation, would be entirely appointed by the mayor. So there would be 3 appointees from IPS, 3 appointees from charter schools, and then 3 quote-unquote experts that can be appointed to the board. But they would all be appointed by the mayor, no elections in that process. So that was a new thing that I learned. So were that to happen, essentially the IPEC would be the ones collecting on the revenue of the property taxes, and then they would get to decide where that money goes. And not for nothing, the major fear outside of just losing democratic or losing or diminishing the power of our vote and our voice in this process is that the mayoral appointed board, at least at the outset, would be majority charter advocates. And so if that board is the one that gets to decide where revenue goes, why would we ever think, what is there to make us believe that they are not going to funnel that money to charter schools or other places, charters or innovations that they feel quote unquote need it? So that was a new thing that I learned. Also, that would go into effect immediately should it pass in this session. So something to keep in mind. So Sam from the ACLU, she was there to talk about 2 twin bills, HB 1039 and SB 122, which essentially it also does 4 things. So these bills are very vague, and they deal with immigration. And the 4 things that they would do are, 1, prohibit any type of restriction on law enforcement enforcing immigration laws. So teachers, clergy, just citizens in general. If you impede or prohibit ICE or federal agents from doing their jobs, specifically around immigration, then that would be quote unquote illegal to do. So you have to let them carry out their terror campaigns on citizens. The second thing is it would require local jails and sheriffs to honor ICE detainers. So right now, if ICE comes and they detain a person and they want to house them somewhere, they have to fill out a request to a sheriff or the jail. Now, the sheriff has the ability currently to deny that request. So they can use their discretion, however much you think they have in these matters, and they can deny. This law would require them to do it without they don't have a choice. They would have to do it. The other thing that this law does within this kind of pillar is that even if you produce the necessary documentation, the documentation that they are asking for to prove that you are a citizen, ICE can still detain you until they decide that you're clear. So right now, once you've produced this information to even the sheriffs or whoever, legally they have to let you go. Once they have confirmed this, once you provide them the documentation, they have to let you go. Part of what these laws are going to do, if they pass, are essentially give them the full discretionary power to decide when to release somebody they've detained for potentially being undocumented. The third thing is it will require all companies to use the E-Verify program. Now, I was just really familiar with this because I just recently started a new job and I had to fill out the E-Verify form. They use this already, the company that I'm working for. The issue here is that E-Verify 1 is known to have some errors and not always up-to-date information. But 2, it's that if a reasonable person, language from this bill, if a reasonable person believes that E-Verify is not correct, then the result returned, so a passing background check that comes back to them, can be dismissed. Again, this is giving extraordinary discretionary power to people running these operations. And so if somebody feels like, oh, for whatever reason, this is not good, or this doesn't match up, and I think this is wrong, they can deny. And essentially, this legalizes discrimination in your hiring practices, because this is all companies that are going to be doing this, required to do this. And because we live in a capitalist society, most companies, historically, when stuff like this has been legal in the past, will err on the side of caution, aka legal discrimination. So there is no consequence for them saying, no, we're not going to hire you because of we're not sure of your documentation status. But that might not even be the reason. That could be the reason that they use, but it could be just because you're black or you're Asian or you're a woman. The last thing that these bills would do is require reporting by the FSSA and by hospitals whenever somebody uses their services that's on Medicaid. So were someone to have... Anyway, it doesn't matter if it's a documented or undocumented person. Essentially, what this is doing is forcing people to tattle on folks who are trying to get help. And because they would then be required by law to do this, it is going to have a very chilling effect on people who need to go to the hospital or need to use essential medical services and can't, because they are afraid of what will happen because they went to this place. AKA, we're going to be disappeared, and who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? should these bills pass, either one of these bills pass, they would go into effect immediately. So that's something we got to be like, this is an urgent matter. If you're not following what's going on in Minneapolis and other parts of the country, this is where we're headed. Indianapolis specifically is headed in this direction. If we don't step up and stop these bills. All right. Tyler Fenwick, the housing reporter from your Indy, he was there to talk about SB 125, which has to deal with eviction cases in Marion County. He actually said that in the last couple of years, there have been a lot of really good steps made in terms of like tenant rights. Not perfect, not by any means comprehensive enough to be like, okay, we're doing the job that we need to do here and providing people with resources and housing. But at the very least, they are doing something where the threat of eviction or having to show up at eviction court is not so intimidating. So a long time ago, or for historically, eviction cases in Marion County specifically took place in township courts, which are much smaller, usually very little security. Like, it's just like you come into a room, you do your thing, and then you leave. In 20, I can't remember the exact date. They began to landlords began to file eviction cases at Superior Court. So in Indianapolis, we recently built like a justice campus, and that's where the Superior Court is. It's a very different. So the standards for entering even into the Superior Court are much higher. Like, the security is much higher. The rules are changing all the time. And it's really intimidating place to enter into. And so SB 125 would essentially remove the majority of eviction cases from Superior Court and put them back into township courts. So this, again, not a perfect solution, doesn't end evictions, but provides the opportunity for people to at least feel like they can show up, and especially if they have an advocate or representation, they can at least feel confident enough to go enter into these spaces from an informed foundation. It's the last one. And so, lastly, Ronick Shaw was there to talk about SB 78 and its twin bill, HB 1034. And this is a cell phone ban in schools. Long story short, fully in support of this bill because cell phones in schools can be major distractions in the worst possible situations. So one of the questions that came up from the audience was like, okay, if we're taking away kids' phones and they're not allowed to have them at all, what happens in the case of a school shooting? And essentially, Ronick brought up a point that I feel like Emily and I have talked about, but I've not really even thought about before. But like, the phones in a situation like that are maybe one of the worst possible things that we can have, because the phones are loud. They can be distracting at the wrong time. They can flash lights. They can do all kinds of stuff that can alert somebody, a potentially active shooter, to the presence of people in a building or a room that they were trying to act like was not inhabited. So essentially, the cell phone ban, it's already kind of there's already kind of like one partially in place, but this one would go a little bit further, and schools would either have students put phones into, or like turn in phones at the beginning of the day, receive them at the end of the day, or they would just don't bring them to school at all. He shared a lot of anecdotal stuff, but essentially that in a lot of different schools, there's been a lot of success because of the removal of phones, and the success has been seen in student engagement, student outcomes, and at the end of the day, the need for that instant lifeline has been is like so low on the priority list because of the distractions that are available, the social media, the games, everything that is available to somebody on a phone. And like the schools already have systems in place for when major disasters might be occurring. And so that includes, how do we communicate this? How are we teaching kids to communicate this and react in these situations? Obviously, kids are going to run the gamut in terms of how they react to stuff, but like that's why they practice these things. It sucks that we have to do active shooter drills in schools. Like, why do we have to do that? Well, it's because this country believes that a gun is more important than a kid's life. But essentially, the cell phone ban, pretty positive. And I will say, most questions about the cell phone bills. That was really surprising to me. But that was a little long-winded rundown of the 5 panelists and the multiple pieces of legislation that they were there to talk about. Now I just want to talk about like what I walked away with from this meeting. Let me say this off the top. I think it's awesome to see people in the city and honestly across the state being like really interested in local politics now, myself included, and wanting to figure out like, how do we be engaged? How do we get engaged? Who can we learn from? Like just really wanting to ask the question, like, what can I do? With that being said, somebody did ask a question, and they asked like, how do we like prioritize and balance activism? Like, I want to be more of an activist, but how do I balance that with being a business owner and a parent and a partner and a community member and all this other stuff that I have going on? And I thought everybody gave really solid answers. But especially in the wake of Renee Nicole Good's murder and seeing some of the discourse, particularly from white women, when they asked this question, and it was a white person who asked this question, I couldn't help but feel like we're not getting it quite yet. And so the room that I was in was probably 70% white folks, at least white passing folks from my perspective. And interestingly enough, 3 of the 5 panelists were people of the global majority. And so I was not expecting anybody to probably say this because vibes, but I'm going to say it now because I've already said it in last Friday's morning show, but I'm going to repeat it. And this is specifically for white folks or people, and specifically for white people, as well as people who sit in really highly privileged positions who might feel like, oh, what else can I do? If you're interested in being more active, even calling yourself an activist, if you are interested in doing that kind of work and being more involved at whatever level, you have to understand this. That to be an advocate, to be an activist requires a level of sacrifice that you're probably not really ready to make if you're asking that question. There are all kinds of ways to advocate. There are all kinds of ways to activate and be an activist. From donating money, from just educating yourself, to sharing information with a friend, showing up at a rally. All kinds of ways to do that work. And doing that work is inherently uncomfortable and unsafe. And if you think that you can just, if your goal is to add activism to your resume and be like, oh, look what I did, then I would strongly encourage you to rethink your why for entering into that space, into that work. Because I think to approach it from that mindset is very privileged. I also think that it's extremely disrespectful, and even if unintentionally so, it is still disrespectful to the Black and brown, the queer and indigenous, all of the people and communities who have literally been getting killed for centuries because they have had to activate and fight for their right to be considered human beings. This is why I couldn't be a politician. I get too fired up. I think it's really, and I say this, I'm saying all this as a person who is Asian, but also grew up in a white community with white family members, in a white family, believing and wishing and praying to God to be white, and who thought this way as I began to deconstruct that aspect of me and start to understand and learn about the struggles of other communities and peoples, while at the same time feeling like I only needed to know the surface level stuff and then was performative advocate. Because I could get into uncomfortable conversations, but I couldn't really answer the questions being asked. And in that discomfort, when it got too uncomfortable, I was stepping out of the fire. Because I didn't want to do it wrong. But also I didn't want to be held accountable for whatever kind of incorrect information that I may have said or whatever, however I felt at that time. So when I say that activating in this way requires sacrifice, I'm not saying like you have to give up everything. I'm just saying you have to understand that to do this, to truly step into the space and do it, means that you're going to have to be disrupting your normal day-to-day life in some way. Like a little bit. You have to allow a little bit of that disruption in. Because if you think you can just be an advocate or an activist and feel like you're doing your part without actually like putting anything on the line, then you're not. That's performance. It's performative. And performative activism is making it infinitely more difficult for us to create the change that we need to see in order for us to truly be free, liberated from the oppressive systems that we have been operating in since before this country was formed. So that's what I took away. Again, I'm fired up about it because these are my community members that are getting attacked. These are my community members that are getting disappeared, detained, deported. And it's been happening before this shit has been going on. And people wasn't activating then. And so, yeah, there's a little bit of passion there because this has been going on. And I don't want to see it happening anymore. And I will say, one of the reasons I was really happy to be in that room last night was because that's what's giving me hope in Indiana right now. When I see people in Tipton, when I see 10 people in Tipton, Indiana, with signs standing outside in the cold saying this is wrong, When I see people in Bedford, Indiana, standing outside in the cold with signs saying this is wrong. When I see people from the town that I grew up in, Rensselaer, Indiana, standing outside with signs in the cold saying that this is wrong, that gives me hope. That gives me hope. Because people can look around and see, regardless of where we fall on an ideological spectrum with politics, in particular, the economy, whatever, that Nazi fucking behavior is Nazi fucking behavior. And Americans, but especially Hoosiers, I guess, we don't play fucking Nazis. And that gives me hope. And so, like, if you've made it this far into this episode, you haven't got upset at me for saying the things that I've been saying, I appreciate you. And I hope you take away with you from this particular conversation that I have a lot of hope. And I understand that the reality that we currently live in is trying to strip away at that hope. But when I see the people in Bedford, I see the people in Tipton, I see the people in Rensselaer showing up, when I see the people at draft last night showing up, having these questions and at least asking the question, what can I do? How do I do this? That gives me hope. So we'll see. I might be cutting this episode way the F down. But that's what, I mean, we're going to be following the bills going through the IGA for the rest of this session, lining up a lot of great conversations with folks to talk about some of the things that are happening right now, to talk about some of the work being done in the State House, and to talk about some of the work being done on the ground when across the spectrum. There's a lot of stuff going on right now, and what's giving me hope is all of the people that I can see in my communities and surrounding showing up. Because when we show up, we can affect change. All right, I don't know what I'm going to talk about tomorrow. I'm sure some wild stuff is going to be happening, but I appreciate y'all being here. If you haven't yet, check out episode 11, one of my favorite episodes that I've done ever of podcasting. If you're an adoptee or if you're interested just in my story or any of my friends' stories, that's the episode for you. So tap in with that. But otherwise, I've been Patrick Armstrong, and until tomorrow,